As the conflict in Ukraine enters a new phase of escalation, Russia has unleashed a relentless barrage of attacks, employing increasingly sophisticated and deadly weaponry. President Volodymyr Zelensky is again pleading to its Western allies to allow deep strikes into Russian territory. Here's a report. In a chilling display of military might, Russia has ramped up its offensive against Ukraine, deploying an array of lethal armaments that are decimating targets. While on the ground, Russian troops continue to increase their artillery fire. These images released by Moscow shows its Iskander ballistic missiles, which have proven deadly in the conflict. Russian forces have been relentless. At the forefront of Russia's brutal campaign are the modified glide bombs, a cost-effective yet horrifyingly destructive ordnance that has transformed the battlefield dynamics. Their devastating impact was tragically demonstrated in Kharkiv, where a single strike on a residential complex left dozens wounded and structures in ruins.
What should I think? I live in this house. I have no apartment. Everything is burning. In 2022, my windows and balcony were blown out. On March 7, a plane dropped a bomb on Krasnodarska Street. On April 11, the windows on this side were also blown out. I invested so much money. Now I have no apartment. I have nowhere to live.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has issued urgent appeals to Western allies, emphasizing the critical need for advanced weaponry and air defense systems. He argues that only by allowing Ukraine to strike deep within Russian territory can the tide of this brutal onslaught be stemmed. Adding to Ukraine's challenges, President Zelensky reported a significant reduction in US support, with monthly deliveries of HIMARS rocket system projectiles cut by 2/3. This development has intensified Kiev's criticism of Western allies for what it perceives as insufficient and delayed military aid. Russian forces claim to have destroyed a Ukrainian train carrying foreign weapons, further complicating the logistics of Ukraine's defense. While Russia has been pounding Ukrainian cities, Ukrainian forces shelled the Belgorod region in Russia, where several apartments were damaged. This region is close to Kursk, where Kiev's troops have launched an incursion.
At about 6:30 a.m., I returned home after a walk with my dog. At this time, it started to rumble. The whole house began shaking. Startled, my daughter jumped up, shouting and crying. We felt the smell of gunpowder in our flat. The rumbling was very strong. The windows were smashed at our neighbors above and below us. Frankly, I do not feel like experiencing such moments in our lives. It is very scary.
The escalation in the fighting comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin orders a significant expansion of his armed forces, aiming to bolster troop numbers by 180,000 to reach a staggering 1.5 million soldiers. This move signals Moscow's readiness for a prolonged and intensified conflict. Bureau Report, WION, World is One. Mr. Dov Zakhaim is the former Undersecretary of Defense in George W. Bush administration and currently Senior Advisor at Center for Strategic and International Studies. He is now joining us live from Washington, D.C. Mr. Zakhaim, welcome to WION World is One. Good to see you. There are critics who say that Russia's devastating use of Soviet-era glide bombs shows how urgently Kiev needs air defense systems. Your thoughts?
Well, absolutely. What we have done, particularly in the United States, much more frankly than our European allies, particularly the British, is that we keep deterring ourselves. We keep telling ourselves, well, if we provide Zelensky whatever he asks for, the Russians will go nuclear. Trouble is, they have not gone nuclear, even as we've allowed F-16 fighter aircraft to go to Ukraine, as well as Bradley armored personnel carriers, Patriot missiles, air defense systems, which is what Zelensky desperately needs. What he also needs, and rightly so, is the ability to strike inside Russia, which we, the United States, have essentially told our allies and, of course, ourselves that we're not going to permit Zelensky to do. Mm-hmm. He needs that. And by the way, that increase of 180,000 troops is the third such increase that Putin has had since the war began. And it tells you that the Russian military is getting very thin. They did not expect the attack on Kursk. They don't have the people to push the Ukrainians back in from the Kursk region. Actually, the Ukrainians are still making slight gains there. The Russians want to advance and are slowly advancing. It's nowhere nearly as quickly as they thought. Mm-hmm. In eastern Ukraine, they're still challenging Donetsk City and a couple of other places. And then, of course, they always have to worry that their border with NATO, particularly now that they have a 900-kilometer border with Finland, is something they have to defend as well. So Putin clearly has his problems as well, but obviously, given that he is determined to destroy Ukraine by any means, and he's using his glide bombs and ballistic missiles the way the Nazis used V-1s and V-2s to terrorize Britain toward the end of World War II, he's not going to stop. And the only way to get him to ease up and negotiate is to give the Ukrainians what they're asking for.
Well, with that being said, Mr. Zakhaim, why are Storm Shadow missiles crucial for Ukraine?
Well, very simply, they're longer range. That gives the Ukrainians the ability to hit targets inside Russia. Now, they've been doing that already with their drones, as you reported as well. There have been attacks inside Russia. But the Storm Shadow really gives the Ukrainians something they just don't have right now, and creates another major problem for Putin. So they need those. Frankly, they need our long-range ATACMS, which are actually longer range even than Storm Shadow, and they need our air defense systems. And let me add, they need more F-16s too.
Finally, Mr. Zakhaim, Putin warned Ukraine that the use of long-range arms will put NATO at war with Russia. What do you make of that statement by Putin?
Well, they have been attacking Crimea, which the Russians says is theirs. They haven't gone to war with NATO. Frankly, he's not in a position to go to war with NATO. As I just said, his troops are already stretched thin, and the ones that he's calling up, of course, need to be trained. They're not exactly high in morale. And finally, he's been threatening nuclear war for quite some time, practically 2 years. And he knows as well as anyone else that a nuclear war may not turn out as well for him as he thinks.
All right. I've been talking to Mr. Dov Zakhaim live in Washington, D.C. Mr. Zakhaim, thank you for your time and for talking to WION World is One today.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.